In calculus, what is a limit? I'm not going to start off by giving you a crazy mathematical definition of one, but here's an example of a limit to understand. Let's say I had a fairly simple function, for example, like the function f of x is equal to x squared. I could ask you, what is f of 2? And as we all know, to find out f of 2, you plug in 2 for x, so that would be 2 squared, which is 4. And so we would say f of 2 is 4. Now that seems pretty easy to me. Too easy, in fact. I want to come up with a different way to try and figure out what f of 2 is. So here's what I've come up with. I think you'll like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a nice big table here, and I'm going to choose some values for x. And quite randomly, I'm going to choose, I don't know, let's say 0, 1, 1.5, 1.9, 1.99, 1.999, and maybe some other numbers like 4, 3, 2.5, 2.1, 2.01, and 2.001. Now, if I plug those into the function x squared, 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, 1.5 squared is 2.25, and then 3.61, 3.9601, and 3.99601. And coming from the other direction, 4 squared is 16, 3 squared is 9, then 6.25, 4.41, 4.0401, and 4.00401. Now, if you look at these values that I've come up with here, I think you would agree with me that the numbers I've chosen are approaching 2 from both sides. The numbers getting closer and closer and closer to 2. The question we ask is, can you tell what value the function is getting closer and closer to? And the answer is, of course, it's getting closer and closer to 4. So we would say the limit as x approaches 2 of our function, f of x, is 4. This is a limit. Now, I think there might be a couple questions you have at this point. One question might be, why the heck would we do this when we could just plug in 2 and get 4? Well, you wouldn't. You wouldn't use a limit in this situation. It'd be kind of overkill. I think it's important to me as I'm introducing this to point out to you that there are 2 really important things about the process we've just done with limits that you need to understand in order to understand limits. The first thing is, if you'll notice, when we began and we were trying to find out what f of 2 is, what did we plug into the function to find out what f of 2 is? Well, of course, we plugged in 2. When we took the limit to try and find out what f of 2 is, what number did we not plug in? And the answer is 2. You see, the interesting thing about limits is we're trying to find out some information about what's going on at 2, but we're never actually plugging in 2. Keep that in mind because that is important. Another thing that I think is important to be aware of is, well, if you think about it, if I gave you a different function and I told you, say, we've got some function g of x. We don't know what it is. I tell you that g of 2 is 4, and then I ask you, what do you know about g of 1.9? The answer is not that it's close to 4. The answer is you know nothing about it. You have no idea, because we have no idea what g is. We don't know what it does. Maybe g of 2 is 4, and maybe g of 1.9 is pi, or negative 70, or 30 billion. I mean, we know nothing about the function. So even though you might think that knowing f of 2 is more valuable than knowing about the limit, the truth is it's very limited. It just tells you one thing about one particular spot in the function. Whereas if I told you the limit as g of x as x approaches 2 of g of x is 4, then if I asked you what is g of 1.9, you could say it's probably pretty close to 4, because if the function is approaching 4, well, it better be near 4 when x is getting near to 2. And so what this tells us is that a limit is a richer idea than just the value at a point, because instead of telling you what's happening at one place, you're extrapolating what's going to happen somewhere based on the behavior of the function in the points around that area. So it tells us a little bit more about the function. It involves a trend rather than just one simple value. Now I want to turn to a situation where limits would actually be useful to us, and we'll cover this in my video on limits part 2.